Hello all, welcome to the second chapter of Web Application Automation with Selenium. In this chapter, we will learn how to interact with a web page, such as entering text, selecting an option in a drop-down, clicking on a button, and more. Coder's Garage. In the last session, we saw how to install Selenium and saw how to initialize the driver and navigate to a URL. In this session, we will see how to identify an element using locators and perform an action on top of it. In this session, we will also see how we can automate a form in Demo QA site. Let's start. What is locator? Locators are defined as an address that identifies the web element uniquely within the web page. It will tell the Selenium on which GUI element it has to perform the given action. Finding the GUI element is a prerequisite for Selenium. Using the find element and find elements in Selenium WebDriver, we will be able to locate the web element in a web page. Let's do a deep dive into locators. Let me take a sample HTML content, which starts with HTML tag. Then body. Then it starts with header in H1 tag. Then followed by form tag. And inside the form we have input text boxes for username, password, and a button. Outside the form, we have the A tag with href, which is a link. And finally we have a paragraph. Now we will see the different locators and its syntax. The first one is ID. Once we initialize the driver, we can use driver.findElement, and as an argument we need call the by class, followed by which locator we are going to pass to identify the element in web page. When we have ID, we will pass by.id. As a second argument, we will pass the value. From the HTML document, for the username input box, we see an ID value username. We will pass this ID value as a second argument to the find element method. The next one is name. When we don't have an ID, it's preferred to use the name locator. Similar to ID, we can call driver.findElement and using the by class, call the name method. For password input box, we see the name attribute and its value, right? We can pass the same to find the element. Next one is XPath. XPath is another technique to identify the element in web page. It will navigate through the HTML structure to find the element. It allows to dynamically search for an element within a web page. Let's see the types of XPath in Selenium. There are two types. One is absolute XPath and another one is relative XPath. Let's see about absolute XPath. This is the simplest XPath locator, and it is a direct way to find the element from the root node. It begins with single forward slash. For example, this XPath starts with single forward slash, then followed by HTML tag, body, then form, and finally the element to be identified, which is input. Since we have multiple input tags available, we are using the index to identify the required input tag. This traverses through HTML, then the body, then it looks for the form tag, and finally it identifies the first input tag. Next one is relative XPath. Relative XPath starts with double forward slash. It begins the search from the middle of HTML down, and it can search elements anywhere on the web page. Relative XPath is most preferable when compared to absolute XPath. For example, this XPath starts with double forward slash form, and we have used the ID attribute using the syntax at ID. For that we need to provide the ID value present in the HTML down, then followed by slash, the input with index. This XPath will identify the form directly, instead of traversing from HTML to body tag. Even if we have multiple forms in the HTML, this XPath will always find the same element based on the given form ID. Next locator is linked text and partial linked text. It can be determined with the help of anchor tag. This anchor tag doesn't have ID or name attribute. In this case, we can use the link text. It looks for the text present in the anchor tag. If you check out the syntax, the link text method is available in by class as link_text, then followed by the text present in the anchor tag. In case, if you want to identify the anchor tag with partial text, then we can use the partial link text. Like link text method, we can call partial link text method in by class, then provide the partial text to identify. The next locator is tag name. Above locators will identify the element with attribute right. This locator uses the tag name present in the HTML DOM to find the element. Using the tag_name method in by class, we can pass the tag name as a value to find the element. The next locator is class name. Similar to other locators, we will use the class attribute to find the element in HTML DOM. We can call the class_name method in by class and pass the content class name present in the HTML DOM. The last one is CSS selector. CSS selector combines the HTML tag and attributes to identify the element. The syntax of value will differ based on the attribute we use. In this example, since it is a class, we use tag name p, then the class value, content, to find the element. Let's move on and see how we can identify the elements using the locators. In this page we have different set of fields, right? To identify an element we need to know the properties of the field. To get the properties, just right-click on the field and click on Inspect. This will open up the HTML DOM and we will be able to see the properties of the selected field. The properties of the selected field is shown up here, and we have the input tag for the text box. We can see the different attributes available. Let's go with ID attribute and copy the ID value. Let's go to our script and see how we can identify the element using find element. Let me assign to first name by giving driver.findElement, which is part of WebDriver. And use the by class to tell the WebDriver which locator it has to use to find the element. To do that, import the following package: selenium.webdriver.common.by and import by class. Once we import, type by dot. Now we can see the different set of locators in by class. Let's choose ID locator and provide the value copied from HTML DOM. Once we identify the element using locator, as a next step, we need to perform an action on top of it. Since the field is input text box, let's choose send keys and provide the required text as string. Let's move on to the next field, which is last name. In a similar way, we can right-click and click on Inspect, or we can use the select icon present in the DOM and click on the field to see the properties. This field is also an input text box and it has the ID to locate the element. Let's copy the ID and use the same in our code, similar to the previous one. Let's give last_name equals driver.findElement and use the ID locator in by class to identify the element. Now, set the value to the element using send keys. This field is also similar to the first name field. On execution, this script will set the value in the first name and in last name field. Let's add one more line to quit the driver before we execute. For that, Use driver.quit. This will destroy the driver after execution. Let's execute this in debug mode and check how the code is working. This should launch the browser and should populate the given text in first name and last name field. The browser is launched and it's being navigated to the given URL. Selenium will wait for the page and DOM elements to get loaded and performs the given action. The execution has reached the debug point. Let's go and check whether the first name and last name values are populated. Let's move on to the next field, email. Inspect the element and check for the properties. This field is also an input text box and it has an ID attribute. Let's copy the ID value and find the element by ID and set the value using send keys. So far, we saw how we can locate the element using the ID attribute. For the next field, we will see how we can locate the element using XPath. The next field is gender. We will see how we can construct a relative XPath to locate the element. When we click on the label, the radio button is getting selected. So, let's get the properties of the label. This has the label tag, and it has for and class attributes. We can use these attributes to write an relative XPath. In case of relative XPath, the path begins from the middle of HTML down. Just press Ctrl and F key to open the search text box. Let me first show you the syntax for relative XPath. To start with, give dot, followed by double slash, then tag name and inside the square brackets, provide the attribute prefixed by @ and then the value. The syntax looks simple, right? Let me replace the tag name with label. And then attribute with for. Finally, we need to provide the value present in the for tag. If you see, the XPath has successfully identified the element. Let's copy this XPath and use it in our code to find the element. Using the XPath option in by class, we can identify this element and perform a click operation on top of it. This will click the mail label, which in turn selects the radio button. Let's move on to the next field, mobile. Inspect the element and check for the properties. This field has an ID attribute. Let's copy this value and identify using the by class ID, similar to first name and last name fields. We are done with mobile field. Now, let's move on to the date of birth field. This is a calendar field where we need to select the required date of birth. Once we click on the field, we see a pop-up. In that, let's choose the year as 2000 and then choose the month as December. Once the year and month are selected, let's choose some date. For example, 15. Now the value is populated as 15th December 2000. As a first step, let's inspect the element and check for the properties. If you see, this field has input tag and ID attribute. Let's copy the ID value and use it in our code to find the element and perform a click operation. As a next step, let's inspect the year field. This field has select tag and class attribute. If you expand the select tag, we can see the list of year which is displayed in the year drop-down. Let's copy the class value. Similar to ID and XPath, let's use driver.findElement by .class name. Once we identified the element, let's set the value as 2000 using send keys. Let's move on to month field and do an inspect. This field is also similar to year field, which has select tag and class attribute. Once you expand the select tag, we can see the months list which is displayed in the drop-down. Let's copy the class value. In a similar way, how we did for year field, let's use the driver.findElement by class name to identify the element. Once we identify the element, let's use send keys to set the value as December. As a next step, let's inspect the date field. In the DOM, we can see the tag as div for each of the date, and it has class attribute which will varies for each date. Other than class, we don't see an ID or name attribute to find the element. To identify the element, let's go with relative XPath approach. At first, let me write a syntax and then we will construct the actual XPath. Relative XPath starts with // then tag name, and inside the square brackets, provide the attribute name prefixed by @ and then the value of attribute. Let's replace the tag name with div. In our case, let's use the area label attribute which has the date details. Finally, replace the value. We see the element is successfully identified. However, we cannot hard-code the entire text, as we may not know the exact date to be given here. XPath has various options to handle this kind of scenarios. Let's use the contains keyword and provide the partial text to identify the element. Let me show how we can write a XPath with contains keyword. Remove the existing attribute and value, and use the contains keyword, and inside the parenthesis, provide the attribute name prefixed by @ followed by comma, and then the partial text. In our scenario, let's give the text as 15. In this XPath, the contains keyword has successfully identified the correct element with the given partial text. Let's copy the XPath. In a similar way, how we have identified the other elements, let's use the driver.findElement and use the by XPath to identify the element. And finally perform the click operation to select the date in calendar field. Alright. Let's execute our code in debug mode and check how it is working. The execution should navigate to the given URL and should populate first name, last name, email ID, gender, mobile number and the date field. The execution has reached the debug point, and it has successfully selected the expected date. Let's look into the next field. Subjects. This field is little different from the other input text box. This field is called data list, and it has the predefined options configured which will display based on the input we give. If you see here, after I type the letter C, it has fetched the predefined options which are relevant to the given text, and we can choose from the list by clicking it or we can choose by pressing the Enter key in keyboard. We can add multiple values from the drop-down list. If you simply given an input and click outside the data list field, the value will not be selected. Also, we cannot inspect the list value in the data list field. From automation perspective, the select package will work only when the field type is select, but here, the data list field is of input type. We cannot use the select package to select the visible text. Hence we need to rely either on the mouse or keyboard event to select a value in data list. Let's inspect the subjects field and check for the properties. As I said before, the data list is an input field with values predefined. Expand the div tag and traverse further to input tag. We see an ID attribute. Let's copy the ID value and use it in our code to find the element. Once we identify the element, we need to use the action chain class to perform the mouse and keyboard events. To implement action chains, we need to import couple of packages. Let's import from selenium.webdriver.common and choose the action_chains and import action chains. Once this is done, in a similar way, we need to import keys. From selenium.webdriver.common.keys. Actions chains is used to perform mouse events, as well as the few other inbuilt Selenium actions, and the keys are used to send keystrokes through our code. Let's go and implement the action class. At first, let's create an object for action chain and assign the existing driver to take control on the elements. Once we create the object, let's check the actions through the newly created object. We see a lot of actions supported by action chains. For our scenarios, let's perform the click operation for the subject field. Once this is done, use the send keys to set the value in the subjects field. As I said before, once we enter the text in the subjects field, we need to press the enter key to select the respective value, right? So, let's use the action chain and keys class to send the keystrokes. For that, give action chain dot send keys and then give keys dot. Now, you can see the various keystrokes supported by the keys class. For our scenario, let's choose enter key. Once we provide all the details to action chain class, call the perform action by giving action chain dot perform. The action chain object now executes the given task sequentially using the perform function. Let's execute this in debug mode and check how this action class is working. The execution has reached the debug point, and we are yet to execute the perform function. Now the action chain object has the above action ready to execute. Let's go and execute the perform function now. If you see here, the value maths is successfully entered in the subject field. Let's look into the hobbies checkboxes. Since it is a checkbox, we can select multiple options based on the user needs. This field is also similar to gender, where we can select the option on clicking the label. Let's inspect the field and check for the properties. If you see here, it has the label tag. And for attribute, which is similar to the gender radio fields. Let's follow the similar approach and write a relative XPath to identify the element. Let me first write the syntax for XPath and then replace the tag name, attribute, and its value. Let's go and check the properties for sports checkbox. Replace the tag name with label, then replace the attribute with for, then replace its value. If you see here, the element is successfully identified with this XPath. Similarly, we can also use the for attribute of other labels to select multiple checkboxes from our code. Let's copy the XPath and move to our code. Let me write a code to find the element using XPath. Once we identified the element, let's add the click action. As I said before, let's find the element using the same XPath syntax for one more checkbox. For example, music. Let's go the browser down and check what is the value present for music label. Just change the value alone in the same XPath which we have already constructed. Copy the XPath and provide in our code for music. Once this is done, add the click action. We will see the address field now. Let me inspect the field and check for the properties. This field has text area as tag name, and it has the ID attribute. Let's copy the ID value and use the same to identify the element. Since it is a text box, let's use the send keys to set the required address in the current address field. Let's check the next field. State and city. These fields are also similar to subjects. This is a data list field, and the values are predefined. We cannot inspect the drop-down list value to select the required text from the drop-down. So, in order to set a value in the data list field, we need to provide the text and press the enter key. If you check here, before we set the state field, the city field was disabled. Once we have entered the value in the state field, the city field got enabled. We will see how can set the value in the state field using the action class. And add a wait condition to check whether the city field is enabled. Once the city field is enabled, let's set the value in the city field. Let's inspect the state element. Let's traverse through the div tag and check for the input tag. This field also has the ID value. Let's copy this ID value and find the element through our code. Once we have identified the element, we need to use the action chain class to pass the keystrokes. I will use the already initialized action chain object to perform the action in this step. At first, I will perform the click action, then send keys to enter the value we need to set in the data list. After this step, we need to press the enter key in keyboard. As we already used in the previous steps, let's use keys class to pass the enter keystroke through send keys in action class. To perform the above actions, we need to call the perform function to execute it. Let's check the city field. By default, the city field is disabled. Once you set a value in the state field, the city field gets enabled. Right? From automation perspective, we need to wait until the field is enabled and set the text in the city field. Let's see how we can use the WebDriver wait and expected condition to achieve this. At first, let's inspect the field and check for the properties. Let me traverse through the div tag and check for input tag. Let's copy the ID value and use it in our code to find the element. As a next step, we need to wait for the city field to enabled. For that, let's import couple of packages. First, import the WebDriver wait by giving from selenium.webdriver.support.ui and import the WebDriver wait. Once this is done, let's import the expected condition package. For that, just give from selenium.webdriver.support.ui support, and import expected conditions. Let's give alias name as EC, so that we can call expected conditions with EC keyword. Now, to call the WebDriver wait, just give the following line of code. WebDriver wait, and inside the parenthesis, as a first argument, pass the existing driver and then followed by timeout in seconds. After this, we need to tell the WebDriver to wait until the specific condition is met. For that, inside the parenthesis, give EC dot. Now can see various options available to set the expected condition. For our scenario, let's choose the element to be clickable and pass the city element. This statement will wait until the city field is clickable with maximum timeout of 10 seconds. We have already seen how to set the text in state field, right? In a similar way, let's use the action chains to click the city field, enter the text, and press the enter key, using the keys class. Finally, let's call the perform function to execute the actions and set the text in the city field. Next, we will check the picture field. We will see how we can upload a file through our code. When we do it manually, we will click on the choose file and then select the file to upload, right? From coding standpoint, let's see how we can achieve this. As a first step, let's inspect the element and check for the properties. If you see here, this field is of input type and it has the ID attribute. Let's copy the ID value and use it in our code to find the element. Since it is an input field, we can use the send keys to pass the file. Provide the complete path of the file for send keys, and this will take care of uploading the file in the picture field. Before we execute and check, let's move this piece of code to execute sequentially. Let me execute this in debug mode and check how the file is getting uploaded. The execution has reached the debug point. Let's run this step and check whether the file is getting uploaded. If you check here, the file is successfully uploaded through our code. Since it is an input field, we can use the send keys to directly pass the file, instead of clicking on the choose file button for upload. Let's move on to the final last element, submit button. Let me inspect and check for the properties. We see the ID attribute. Let's copy this and find the element in a usual way. Since it is a button, let's use the click action to submit. Once we are done with this, as a next step, we will submit the form manually and check what is end result. Once you submit the form, we see a pop-up with all the information. We will see how we can validate this pop-up message. Let me inspect the message and check for the properties. This text is present under the div tag and we see the ID attribute. Let's copy the ID value and use it in our code to find the element. To validate, let me check the element is displayed, and also get the text and print it in the console. Let me call final message dot is displayed function. This function will return true if the element is displayed. Let me assign this to a status variable and print it in console. In a similar way, I can use the final message to get the text from the element. For that, let's write submit message equals final message dot text. This text function is going to extract the text from the element. Let me go and print the submit message in the console. Let's execute this end to end and check how our code is executing. The execution is completed successfully. Finally, our code has performed the given actions and printed the status as true and also printed the thanks message in the console. In the next chapter, we will learn about building a complete UI automation framework from scratch. We will understand the core components such as test cases, steps, data tables, driver script, keywords, reporting, etc. Thanks for watching. To continue learning with us, like, share and subscribe to our channel.